The official Five Nights at Freddy's games and FNAF fan games literally go hand in hand. Both have been around for more than a decade at this point, and they've both grown and changed so much, especially the fan games. Now, I'm sure any veteran Five Nights at Freddy's fan like myself would agree with me in saying that, as despite how much I can appreciate the first FNAF fan games historically, because obviously without them, we wouldn't be playing the FNAF fan games we know and love today. Well, probably, anyway. But the first FNAF fan games were shit. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat things here, they were shit. A large majority of the fan games in 2014 and 2015 were very low quality, and many of them were just straight up copies of FNAF 1 with hardly any differences. It's honestly quite mind-boggling to look at a more recent high-quality entry such as Blood and Gears, and a very low-quality entry such as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Massacre, the very first FNAF fan game, because they both look so different in terms of quality that it's hard to believe that the earlier FNAF fan games like Pizzeria Massacre were generally what people were used to seeing when they looked at the FNAF fan games that existed in those days. Or at the very least, it was until 2015. On the 3rd of July 2015, an individual by the name of Elmoyoo posted a trailer on his YouTube channel. The trailer in question was for an upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's fan game called Five Nights at Candy's, a game where you work as a security guard at a burger restaurant called Kenny's Burgers and Fries, and you try to avoid the hostile animatronic cats, penguins, rats, monkeys, and white drawing things. Now, on the surface, it does seem like a straight-up clone of Five Nights at Freddy's, but the reason why this trailer exploded in popularity was because this fan game was different. It had original characters, a similar yet different environment, and even more notably, the game replicated that same tone of atmosphere and rendering that Scott Corvin had done when he made the first 5 FNAF games. It was Five Nights at Freddy's visually and conceptually, but as a whole, it was very different. Because of this, the trailer was highly praised by so many people in the FNAF community, and when the game itself released on the 18th of July 2015, it exploded in popularity. Markiplier and Jacksepticeye posted Let's Plays on YouTube, gaining millions of views. And eventually, Elmoyoo made sequels and even remakes, all of which culminated into the Five Nights at Candy's series that we all know and love today. Now, I've said this countless of times already in my community posts leading up to this video, but I love Five Nights at Candy's. Next to Final Hours, Fredbear and Friends Stuff to Rot, Those Nights of Fredbear's, and The Joy Creation, it is on the list of one of my favourite Five Nights at Freddy's fan games. Not just because it was the very first FNAF fan game that I played and finished, like my relationship with Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but I also love the Five Nights at Candy's games because of its style, its originality, its lore that is very easy to put together when you look hard enough and pay attention to the subtle details, and of course the characters themselves. Now, I know countless of other YouTubers have made their own retrospectives about Five Nights at Candy's already, but today I decided to throw my hat in the ring and provide you with good content and make my own Five Nights at Candy's retrospective regardless, so that I could show my appreciation for this series that is loved by all in the FNAF community. Well, you know, unlike a certain someone. Seriously though, how does this dick have the audacity to make a 30-minute video talking about why Five Nights at Candy's is overrated when he got sponsored by fucking Genshin Impact, the world's most overrated piece of trash? Get terminated, I beg. In this video, I'll be talking about Five Nights at Candy's, reviewing each game in depth, where the Five Nights at Candy's series is at now, and talking about the future of the games themselves, most notably the upcoming Five Nights at Candy's 4. Now, quick disclaimer, I will only be talking about the games themselves, not the lore. Because 1, Five Nights at Candy's 4 is in the works, which will highly likely throw in a lot of lore, which would make my explanation about the story of Five Nights at Candy's inaccurate. 2, I'm sure everyone who is very familiar with Five Nights at Candy's knows what the lore is at this point. And 3, I'm not really a theorizing lore analysis channel. It's just not my cup of tea, content-wise. I might talk about the lore in some form or another, if I have to anyway, so I can provide some context. But as a whole, I will only be talking about the games. Oh yeah, and also, I'll be talking about my opinions, blah blah blah, some might be hot takes, yada yada yada. If you don't agree, fuck off, I don't care, here's the door. Now, without further ado, let's begin, starting with the game that started it all. Five Nights at Candy's 1. So what Five Nights at Candy's 1 is all about in a nutshell is that it's the year 1987, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, more specifically the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location for Five Nights at Freddy's 2, based on the newspaper we see in the game over screens, has closed down. As a result, a new similar restaurant by the name of Candy's Burgers and Fries has suddenly exploded in popularity due to the closure of Freddy's. We, the player, play as a character who goes by the very original name of Mary Schmidt, who has decided to take the role of a night shift security guard at Candy's to watch over the restaurant and the animatronics, being Candy and Cindy, Chester the chimpanzee, Blank, Penguin, a broken down version of Candy, and the rat. Yeah, a very creative name, am I right?
I'm the giant rat that makes all of the rules.
And from here, you know how it goes. The animatronics are hostile, we gotta survive 5 nights against said hostile animatronics, blah blah blah. Okay, so like I said before, the first Five Nights at Candy's game is pretty similar to how the first Five Nights at Freddy's game worked. We work as a night shift security guard at a restaurant with hostile animatronics, we gotta survive 5 nights, there's a phone guy, we gotta conserve power, we can use the doors to keep the animatronics out, etc. But what made the first Five Nights at Candy's game so successful is that the game also introduced a lot of unique gameplay mechanics, to the point that despite looking like the first Five Nights at Freddy's game, it also made Five Nights at Candy's 1 original in a way. For starters, the camera system. So unlike Five Nights at Freddy's 1, where despite the pizzeria being really dark, you could still see all the rooms in the pizzeria very clearly with the cameras, the camera system in Five Nights at Candy's 1 had 2 settings, a normal mode and a night vision mode, which can be turned on or off by double clicking on the camera you're already viewing, allowing you to actually see the restaurant instead of just looking at pitch black static. However, saying that, you wouldn't really need to use the night vision that much, as you would already be able to tell where the animatronics are by looking at their glowing eyes through the static. Plus, night vision mode actually consumes more power, so when you're trying to find the animatronics without using the night vision mode, you'll also be saving up some power. Although that method is not 100% effective, but I'll get to that in a minute. Speaking of the animatronics, what made the animatronics different from the characters we know and love from Five Nights at Freddy's 1 was that not only did Five Nights at Candy's 1 had more animatronics to survive against, making the game a lot more challenging, but the animatronics also had their own individual mechanics, movement patterns, and strategies. Now, Candy and Cindy are pretty normal. They don't really have any unique mechanics. They just roam around the building. They can go to either the left or right side of the office. Their movement patterns are pretty random. And Chester the chimpanzee, again, like with Candy and Cindy, he also doesn't really have any unique mechanics. Although he does have a set pattern, as he can only move around in the left-hand side of the building. So you have to pay close attention to the cameras on your left when he moves around. Okay, now it's time to get interesting. Blank. So Blank is like the Five Nights at Freddy's 1 Foxy of this game. So Blank is active from night 3 onwards, and he starts from this area in the drawing room. Blank will slowly become more and more active, he'll look at the camera, then he'll take a few steps, and when he gets out of the drawing room, he will immediately go to this camera, camera 05, main hall 3, which conveniently is where the window in your office looks out to. And when Blank gets to that spot, he will smash the window, break into your office, causing the power to go off, somehow, and then Blank will kill you with probably the most anticlimactic jump scare ever.
To the office through the window, and even managed to crack the glass slightly once. Yeah.
What the hell was that?
To beat Blank, all you have to do is just frequently check the drawing room camera, and when Blank is no longer in the drawing room, immediately shut the door to the window in front of you, wait for the sound cue to play, open the door, and then Blank will reset. Then there's the penguin. Now, I absolutely despise this thing. So much like how Blank works similarly to Foxy from Five Nights at Freddy's 1, the penguin is basically the balloon boy of Five Nights at Candy's. So what the penguin does is that at first he moves around like a typical animatronic, but when he gets to your office, he won't jump scare you. He will instead go into your office, sit under the desk with the most cutest smile ever. Okay, I promise this is the last time I'm gonna do a Pingu bit. And he'll disable the controls for all of your doors, and then he'll constantly repeat his text-to-speech voice line.
Can I take your order? Can I take your order? Take your order. Can I take your order? Can I take your order?
Until an animatronic gets into your office and kills you. Now, the reason why I despise him is that it's not because of what he does to you when he gets into your office. If anything, I find it funny than annoying. But it's just that because the penguin is so goddamn tiny, and also because it can be a very blind bitch when I'm not paying attention, but that's probably more of a skill issue on my part than anything. The penguin could be on a camera you're viewing, but you could easily ignore him by accident. And so I hate him so much for that. I don't care how cute this little shit looks. You want to take my order? How about you take my middle finger and shove it up your fucking ass? And finally, Old Candy and the Rats. Now, remember when I said that looking at the cameras without using the night vision mode was not 100% effective? Well, these two are the reasons why. So unlike the other animatronics, where their eyes can glow in the dark, Old Candy and the Rat don't have eyes. So when these guys are active, you really gotta pay attention and use your night vision mode on your cameras at all times. I really liked how the animatronics worked in Fantasy Candies 1, because as the game has a bigger roster of animatronics compared to the roster in FNAF 1, the game brought in a lot of unique mechanics for the characters. And as a result, the game always keeps you on your toes by forcing you to use all the tools you have at your disposal. It in turn makes the game a lot more challenging and fun to play, unlike FNAF 1, where as amazing as it is, you would get bored of it very quickly when you play it more than once. Overall, Fantasy Candies 1 was such an amazing entry. It's a lot more challenging and it's engaging. 10 candy bars out of 10, I don't know, rats. So Five Nights at Candy's 2 was released on the 28th of February 2016. In the game's story, the game takes place 20 years after the events of Five Nights at Candy's 1, August 2007. And we play as Mary Schmidt's 17-year-old daughter, who again goes by the very original name of Marilyn Schmidt. Marilyn Schmidt has lost a bet with one of her school friends, as we see in this interesting cutscene.
You have to spend 5 nights in that old factory again, or else people will think you're a chicken. Scared.
Man, it really was a shame Marilyn died at the end of the game, because, she really should have thought twice about her friendship cycle. Marilyn's friends were a bunch of pricks, that's all I'm saying. Because Marilyn lost the bet, she now has spent 5 nights at the abandoned robotics corp factory. And unfortunately, this abandoned factory just so happens to house all of the animatronics from Five Nights at Candy's 1. Except this time they are broken and are falling apart. And so Marilyn now has to survive against the hostile animatronics using phones and camera flashes. Because apparently in the Five Nights at Candy's universe, built-in torches on mobile phones don't exist. Okay, so what do I think of Five Nights at Candy's 2 as a whole? Well, to be honest, I really don't like Five Nights at Candy's 2. I think it is one of the most weakest and poorly made entries in the Five Nights at Candy's series. Even Elmoyoo said that this game was his least favorite. In fact, he even said that he didn't even want to make Five Nights at Candy's 2 in the first place. And he just made it because so many people were asking for it.
Leave me alone!
And I'm sure any game developer, and by extension, a content creator, would know that being forced to make something that you didn't really want to make would always end up being bad. And Five Nights at Candy's 2 is just a living, breathing example of that. But why do I think Five Nights at Candy's 2 is such a bad game? Well, the first problem I have with Five Nights at Candy's 2 is the quality. Now, I don't think every aspect of the quality of Five Nights at Candy's 2 is inherently bad. The 8-bit cutscenes between each night are quite well done, especially the music. It definitely creates an eerie vibe for these cutscenes. It's the actual gameplay of Five Nights at Candy's 2 itself where I have a problem with the quality. I mean, just look at it. It's bright, it's dull, and it looks unfinished. It's definitely quite a downgrade when you look at how great the quality was in Five Nights at Candy's 1, where it really emulated that Scott Cawthon feel that the earlier Five Nights at Freddy's games had. Whereas Five Nights at Candy's 2 just looks like a kid's project from school. The quality of the character models in the game are also quite bad, and some just look plain lazy. Like, this game is supposed to take place 20 years after Five Nights at Candy's 1. These animatronics should be dirty and rotten. These guys just look like they've been left to rot for a few years. Now, as for the gameplay mechanics of Five Nights at Candy's 2, they are also quite a letdown from how great the gameplay mechanics were in the first Five Nights at Candy's game. So basically what you need to do in order to survive in Five Nights at Candy's 2 is that you have to use these phones in your camera monitor, because when an animatronic hears the phone ringing from somewhere in the factory, the animatronic will get distracted and will run off to find out where the noise is coming from. So it's basically based off of the audio cue mechanic in Five Nights at Candy's 3, except the major difference here is that in Five Nights at Candy's 2, you're using phones. Now, in theory, this gameplay mechanic is a good concept. It's just that the way it was executed in Five Nights at Candy's 2 made it such a letdown. Now, when you play Five Nights at Candy's 2 for the very first time, you'll see this hint in the first night about the phones. It says, the animatronics can only hear the phone if they're in the same room as the phone or if they're in the central hall. Now, for the central hall bit in that sentence, it is true. But as for this bit where the animatronics can only hear a phone if they're in the same room as the phone, that's bullshit, because in actuality, you can literally bounce an animatronic from one side of the factory to the other using the phones. This in turn would just make the game easy as shit, because if you just repeat this pattern of just bouncing the animatronics around the factory all the time using the phones, you could easily beat the game. And going back to the animatronics for a second, in terms of gameplay, they're also disappointing. Now, like I said earlier in my review of FnafFan 1, what made the game engaging was that the animatronics had unique mechanics, which in turn makes the game challenging, as you would need to learn how the animatronics work and what you would need to do to survive against them. FnafFan 2, however, just threw all of that out of the window. Aside from Chester the chimpanzee, who can only get to you through the vents, and the penguin, who doesn't kill you and can only disable your cameras if you look at him too long, all the animatronics do is just roam around the factory and they get distracted by the phones. That's it. Heck, the rat and the cat who are active on night 6 literally just do the exact same thing as what Chester and the penguin do. The lack of proper unique mechanics for the animatronics in FnafFan 2 ultimately made the game even more easy for players to understand, which in turn makes the game dull, boring, and repetitive. So yeah, all in all, FnafFan 2 was quite honestly a disappointment. Thankfully, there is some hope for this game though, as Elmoyoo does have plans to create a remastered version of FnafFan 2, with updated renders, better graphics, and potentially, like with FnafFan Remastered, some new content. However, considering that Elmoyoo is busy making FnafFan 4, I highly doubt we can expect to see a FnafFan 2 remastered game anytime soon. However, someone actually managed to create their own remastered version of FnafFan 2, called FnafFan 2 Sugar Rush, made by a developer by the name of BoobyGamer12. Did I say your name right? Is it Booby or Buby? I don't fucking know. Now, it isn't really a proper remastered version of FnafFan 2. Like, it's not remastered in a way like how FnafFan 1 was remastered. Visually, it is still the same FnafFan 2 game, but it's just recoded with new mechanics, such as having phone calls in every night, and a new function for the phone system on the cameras, where all the phone icons in the game would be locked apart from the icon on the camera that you're viewing, which is a million times better, because it then eliminates the issue in the original FnafFan 2 where you could just bounce the animatronics around the factory using the phones. Honestly, if you're interested in playing the FnafFan games for yourselves after watching this video, don't bother playing the original FnafFan 2, just play Sugar Rush. They're not that different from each other visually, and you'll overall have a better experience when you play Sugar Rush. So FnafFan 3 was released roughly a year after FnafFan 2, on the 5th of March 2017. So story-wise, much like Five Nights at Freddy's 4, FnafFan 3 is a prequel to the FnafFan story. Taking place in the 1960s, it is all about a younger Mary Schmidt who witnessed an incident that took place at the Rat and Cat Theatre, where she witnessed a guy called the Puppeteer killing the actors of the Rat and the Cat characters. Since then, she has been blaming herself for the incident, and as a result, she has developed immense fear of the characters, and she's been plagued by nightmares of terrifying, monstrous versions of the Rat and the Cat. And so it is up to us to fight the monsters, remember what had happened, and finally put closure on everything that happened. And that's pretty much the plot of FnafFan 3 in a nutshell. So, what do I think of FnafFan 3? Well, FnafFan 3 is one of my favorite entries in the FnafFan series. Why? Well, let's dive in. So the first thing I like about FnafFan 3 is the originality of it. This was where FnafFan really started to go balls inside our original. In FnafFan 1 and 2, while they were original to an extent in terms of setting, characters, and story, predominantly they still played out the same way as Five Nights at Freddy's, or at the very least, the earlier FNAF games. Whereas in FnafFan 3, the originality was cranked up to the max. It wasn't just a game that was Five Nights at Freddy's, but different characters and mechanics. It started to drift away from the FNAF elements, and it essentially became its own thing. Game. You were fighting off monstrous hallucinations instead of physical animatronics. The locations and the settings in the story were original. Heck, Candy himself wasn't even present in this game. Candy is barely even mentioned in this game, apart from this one cutscene at the end of Night 5. Which back in those days, an official FNAF game and a FNAF fan game not focusing on the title character was almost unheard of. Now, the general structure of the gameplay of FnafFan 3 itself is the same as Five Nights at Freddy's 4. You play as a little child, alone in your bedroom at night, and you have to ward off the monsters. games. But what made these two games very different aside from the enemies are the mechanics. For example, you have to constantly rewind and play a tape player which plays very soothing music, because if you don't, the nights will end up lasting a lot longer, like 10 to 20 minutes longer, making the game a lot harder and more stressful to complete. Although if you're that kind of degenerate gamer who likes to lock in and play games with the difficulty cranked up to the max, then this game is for you. What I also like about the mechanics in FnafFan 3 is that the game forces you to use these mechanics. Like for example the tape player that I just explained. You also have to constantly check each corner of your bedroom at all times, as the monsters can spawn in at any side randomly, and when the monsters get in, you have to shine your flashlight on them as quickly as you can because they can swiftly move to different positions. Each mechanic in FnafFan 3 have significant importance for survival, and they have to be used, and the game will punish you in one way or another if you fail to do so, which I absolutely love. Having a game when you're forced to use the tools you have at your disposal to survive makes the game very challenging and engaging. Another thing I like about FnafFan 3 is the scare factor. So the main characters of the game are Monster Rat, Monster Cat, and Monster Vinny. And the reason why I mentioned these guys is because in my humble opinion, they are the reason why the scare factor in FnafFan 3 is amazing to me. Like I said, the characters in FnafFan 3 aren't actually animatronics, they're just hallucinations. And their designs definitely show that. They are realistic looking, flesh-like monsters, which arguably is a whole lot better than how the designs of the nightmare animatronics in Final Fantasy 4 were approached, regardless of how good as they are. Final Fantasy 3 was just overall an amazing entry. It was challenging, it was scary, and it forces you to use the mechanics. And it showed the FNAF community at the time that fan games and fan projects could be more than just FNAF, but slightly different. They could drift away from the core elements of Final Fantasy Freddy's and become its own thing, whilst retaining its core inspiration from Final Fantasy Freddy's itself. And ultimately, that's what made Final Fantasy so popular, and how the FNAF fan games we know and love today were approached. I'm really glad that this game was just overall a big step up from how atrocious Final Fantasy 2 was. This game generally feels like a lot of dedication and passion went into it, and it definitely turned out very well. If this was the final installment of Fantasy Candies, it definitely would have felt like a very sweet send-off. But no, all of this shit happens. Okay, so originally I was going to have Fantasy Candies Remastered and FNaC Fur in their own individual segments, like how I did with Fantasy Candies 1, 2, and 3. However, considering that I couldn't really think of anything to say about these games because I feel like that they're quite minor in comparison to the actual Fantasy Candies games, I just said fuck it, and I'm just going to briefly talk about both of them in the conclusion segments. So let's go! Woohoo! So fast forward 2 years to August of 2019, Fantasy Candies 1 was remastered, with new mechanics and new content. Again, I don't really have much to say about Fantasy Candies Remastered. It's basically the original Fantasy Candies 1, just the RTX is turned on. The mechanics are the exact same as how they were in the original. The animatronics work the exact same as how they worked in the original. You get the gist. But the only major thing that's different with Fantasy Candies Remastered, and I'm sure all of you are screaming this right now, is this new piece of content called Night Null. Night Null is basically a playable night that can only be unlocked when you select specific numbers on the custom night menu. At first, it will function like a regular night, but when you check the main stage on the cameras, instead of finding Candy and Cindy, you'll find a purple, shadowy version of Candy. Shadow Candy will then appear in your office and jump scare you, and then this is where Night Null will officially begin. Now, in order to beat Night Null, you need to defeat Shadow Candy by constantly checking the cameras and closing the doors on him when he tries to get you. Otherwise, when he gets in, he will jump scare you and drain your power significantly. And when you run out of power, that is where Shadow Candy will actually kill you. Night Null is amazing, but as you can imagine, it is very frustrating. To this day, I have still not completed the night. But if you're wondering what happens when you complete Night Null, you're basically just rewarded with a teaser for Fantasy Candies 4, which was very interesting. But yeah, other than that, Fantasy Candies Remastered is pretty much the same as the original Fantasy Candies 1. But regardless, I think it still looks pretty amazing. And finally, FNaC Fur. Now, again, I don't really have a lot to say about it. Basically, think of it as like FNAF World, but it's 8-bit and it's Fantasy Candies, obviously. There's nothing else to that. But again, it is a pretty charming and funny game, so 10 out of 10. And on that note, that's pretty much all of the Fantasy Candies games. But what is the future of these games? Well, as of now, Fantasy Candies 4 is still in development. But when is this game going to release exactly? Well, we don't know. All we know about the release of Fantasy Candies 4 is that it will release after 2025. But considering Elmoyoo is busy making console ports of the Fantasy Candies games as part of the FNAF Fan First initiative, and presumably remastered versions of Fantasy Candies 2 and 3, I bet Fantasy Candies 4 will probably be released at the end of 2026 or early 2027. But that's just a theory. So, yeah, that was my retrospective on FnafFan Candies and why I love the FnafFan Candies series. I said this before, and I apologize if I might sound overly corny, but FnafFan Candies really does hold a special place in my heart. It's more than just a fan game of FNAF. It's a fan game that's well polished and original, with iconic and unique animatronics, as well as new environments and unique gameplay mechanics that will always keep you on your toes when you play them. If you want to play a good fan game of FNAF, FnafFan Candies is a good place to start. So like I did in my FNAF Freddy's Final Hours retrospective, I will be leaving links to all of the FnafFan Candies games from the original FnafFan Candies 1 all the way up to FNaC Fur in the pinned comment below, so you can play them. They're all on Game Jolts and they're free to play, like all FNAF fan games. And that's pretty much all there is to say now, I guess, so I'm gonna fuck off now. Thank you for watching, I hope it was informative and entertaining. I'm very sorry that this video took a hot minute to make. My life got in the way a lot while making this video, but I do hope it was worth the wait. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. Follow me on Instagram and Threads, join my Discord server, invite link is available in the about page and the pinned comments, and I shall see you all next time. Bye!